I want to talk about the angels in my life. I mean, just those people that stepped up and you know helped me in my time of need. And I want to start with my grandma, my mom's mom. Um, they lived in Eugene, Oregon. My grandfather's name was Eugene. I remember being a little kid, man, going, "Grandpa, they named Eugene after you." And I mean, he got pissed. He was like, "No, I'm not that old." It's like, anyway. So my mom got pregnant with Leslie at 16, and my dad and her got married, and then my dad joined the army, or my dad had joined the army and then got her pregnant, I guess. And so he went back to Williamsburg, Virginia. Is that okay? Anyway, and that's where my sister was born. And then my dad got shipped off to Germany, in the army, and he was there for I think 2 years. Anyway, he he didn't come home until I was 14 months old, and my mom was there in Virginia, and she was there with no family, no anything, and so she went back to Eugene to move in with their parents with two kids, my sister and myself, and so I lived at my grandparents till I was 14 months old. That was my home, and my dad came home, and then he went to the University of Oregon, and we moved into university housing, and that was just really shitty housing. You could see through the cracks through the floor and the dirt underneath. It was horrible. So my dad didn't meet me till I was 14 months old. So anyway, my grandmother, my mom was just a bitter, I mean, vindictive woman. And I think what happened was my mom had an older brother who ended up being in the Air Force, and at one time was the highest ranking enlisted man in the Air Force. And my grandparents were proud of him, and my mom's sister Linda went to she went to school the same time my dad did. I think they graduated together. And then she got married to my uncle Doug, and he was ended up being a professor at Temple back in New Jersey, and he wrote books, and he taught teachers how to teach is what he did. And so those two did really well, and they got on with life. And here my mom gets pregnant, and I my mom, just the way she was like a hurt animal her whole life, man. She was, and I wish some of those people were alive so I could ask questions, say, hey, what happened back then? And I don't know, but I think what happened was that my grandparents and my uncle and my aunt all just ripped my mom apart, tore her apart. 1959, she's getting pregnant. I mean, you didn't do that in America back then. That was your bad girl. And then she has another child, me, and I think they just tore her up, and then they didn't put her back together. They just left her like that puddle on the floor and just walked away from her. And that poor woman, man, the life that she had. I thought it was funny. I was visiting my second cousin, Juanita. That was my dad's favorite cousin. And her husband, she had remarried a few times, but her current husband, Ross, good guy. I was visiting them 3 years ago, and we're sitting there talking, and he goes, yeah, my mom, back in the 50s, she was the nurse in charge, or whatever. She was the nurse, underground, black market. She would, girls that came in pregnant, she would get them, I think, up to Portland to a doctor. I mean, a real doctor, not, just some clown on the street, and get them abortions. And he's looking at me, and he goes, yeah, I remember my mom telling me that one of the Aldrich girls got an abortion, and it wasn't my mom. And so that means that my Aunt Linda got pregnant and got an abortion back then. It's like, and she was always Miss Goody Two Shoes, and we were the black sheep of the family, and they all rubbed our noses in it and just had no problem with that. Anyway, So I thought that was funny, man. I'm like going, my Aunt Linda, Anyway, so, my grandmother was the matriarch of that family. My grandpa, he was whipped. I mean, he, you know, kowtowed to her. He, at her every whim. I think my grandpa really was a wimp. But, I mean, he was like Archie Bunker. I mean, we used to call him Archie Bunker, man. My grandpa was just like Archie Bunker back there, in the 60s watching, All in the Family. And, that's my grandpa. Anyway, so I think that my grandmother, like, headed all this shit that they, poured on my mom and, that just ripped her apart. And she was the one that led that charge. And I think, what an evil thing to do to your kid. That is like, oh man. And, it's interesting growing up because with my mom, I was never safe. I was never like, if I skin my knee and I'm crying, I'm not going to put my head on my mom's lap because I ain't getting comfort there. But my grandma, she was the one I would run to and put my head in her lap and she'd comfort me. And, that I'm grateful that I had that one woman in my life that, we lived in Eugene until I was 6 years old. And I mean, we only lived like a mile from their house, and we didn't have a shower at our place. And I have always been just a boat nut. I mean, always. I loved boats, man. Just boats. And so my grandparents, had a bathtub, and I'd, go over there, and there'd be all my plastic boats in the bathtub. I could just imagine my grandpa. He worked at a lumber mill loading rail cars, and he'd get up at like, 4:30 in the morning and go to work. And I could just imagine him getting up, kicking them damn boats out of the way. Johnny's got boats there. So anyway, we would always, like every day we would go over there. So virtually I lived with my grandparents till I was, it was kindergarten. I was in kindergarten, we moved to Seattle. So I was 5 years old. And, I am so grateful that my grandmother never let any of that crap from my mom not affect our relationship, but she never introduced it into our relationship. I never felt any of that, what my mom had done and stuff. She did. My grandma did not take it out on me, and I'm so grateful to her for that. Is that, I guess you have grandkids and you love them, and it just like becomes, that's just like, that's what it is, and you love them. So I was truly grateful that my grandmother did not let that reflect on our relationship. So we moved to Seattle, lived there for 2 years, went to kindergarten, first grade, moved to Texas. And my parents and my grandparents, they used to always hold it over mine and Leslie's head that if we were good enough, they would take us to Disneyland. If we were good enough. And we were never, ever good enough. And we would never, ever be good enough. And so we moved from, we lived in Seattle. My dad worked for Boeing for 2 years, saw the writing on the wall that they're going to have one of their big 50,000 people layoffs, whatever it is, 35,000 people. And he applied at Lockheed down in Houston, Texas. My dad worked for Unisys, Sperry, Univac, whatever their names changed to. And so he got a job. He was working, for Sperry, Univac down there in Texas. And so we drive down there, and do you think we could go through California and go to Disneyland? No. I did get to see Old Faithful, though, and, we went that way. Anyway, 23 years old, we moved to California, and I go to Disneyland for the first time, and I'm walking down Main Street, USA, and I am absolutely pissed. I'm going, this, what they did, was not, I mean, they just held that over our heads with never any intention of taking us. So I remember we're driving, and my dad bought, let me see, this would have been 67, and he bought a 65 white Ford station wagon. And so we're driving down in that, and all those kids in the back. And I remember one time my head just was spinning around, and I'm just like, I've had enough and stuff. And my mom's reaching over the back seat and just, beating me. And then she goes, "If you don't knock it off, I'm going to send you home to grandma's." And I'm going, "Send me." And I spent the rest of my life waiting for my mom to send me back to grandma's. I wanted to go back to grandma's. I was like, pfft. Anyway. So I'm 16 years old, and Central Kitsap High School, I'm in 10th grade, and that's 10th through 12th at Central Kitsap High School back then. And on Friday the 13th, they call it sophomore day, and the seniors pick on the sophomores, put their heads in toilets, throw them in the dumpsters, do stuff to them, wedgies. And it was like, I'm not going to put up with that. I'm not, so I skipped school, and a bunch of friends of mine came over to my house. I guess one of them had an illegal ID or something, because we went and bought beer, and we ran into this guy we knew in the neighborhood, and his dad worked with my mom. My mom worked with his dad at I guess she was working for Lockheed too, at Bangor sub base, and they do the Trident missile, as Lockheed did. And anyway, JJ was there, and I'm talking to him, saying, "Hey man, I'm at a party, why don't you come out over?" And his mom was standing, I didn't even know his mom at the time, or I never met her. And his mom was standing off, and she heard all this, and she called her husband, and her husband talked to my mom, and my mom calls and goes, "Oh, you're having a party, huh?" And she goes, "Well, you better not run away between now when I get home." And I did. I ran away. Bremerton, Washington, man. I stuck my hand out and got a ride down past Tacoma. I got picked up by this gay guy, and he tried to hit on me that night, and I just was like, no. I mean, I'm just getting my stuff, getting up, ready to leave again, and he just said, okay, and he left me alone. I slept on the couch, and then the next morning, he gave me a ride to the freeway, and the on-ramp was like, I mean, it was about 200 yards from the freeway where I was standing at the beginning of the on-ramp. And this guy on the freeway pulls over, and he's yelling at me, and so I go run over there, and he gives me a ride down to Eugene. And I think I spent the night at his house. And the next morning, at that time, I was running away. A friend of mine, Billy Dowell, had moved to Los Angeles, and I was going to go down and join him. I mean, now it's like, look at that. You get down to Los Angeles, where are you going to go? I mean, it's just like, So I get to Eugene, and, I get up that morning, and I call my grandma. And, her first question was, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah." And she goes, like, "Do you need a ride?" And I'm going, "No, she goes, "I'll come pick you up and, bring you back home." And, I'm sure my mom had talked to her. The whole family was worried, they didn't heard from Johnny. Johnny had taken off, and, who knows where. And I said, "No, Grandma, I'll walk." And so, I walked about 2 miles out to my grandma's house. I get there, put my backpack in the extra bedroom closet, and it was bizarre because without nothing being said, I now lived there. My grandma took me out like that night. She found it was a Centurion Super Le Mans 10-speed bike. It's not a racing bike, but it is, a racing bike, say, is 12 pounds. This thing was probably 18. So, I mean, it was a nice bike, and it became a part of my ass. I rode that thing, man. I could go anywhere. Nothing stopped me. And so she bought me that bike. She went out, bought me $300 worth of clothes, and enrolled me at South Eugene High School where my parents had gone. That was kind of wild for me to be walking the halls that my parents had walked. And even went and found this one teacher that had been friends with my dad through all the years. I mean, they still kept in touch, Jerry Webking. And he was a gay dude, man. And my dad, him got along. He, left my dad alone. But that was interesting. And so I lived at my grandma's. I mean, I lived at my grandparents. God, I had a safe place to stay. And man, I used to think, oh man, that's horrible. A kid running away. I mean, that's like, oh man. And later on in life, I realized that with my mom, as toxic as she was, I that was the smartest thing I ever did, was ending up at my grandparents. She took me in. I finished out my junior year of high school. Met my friend Kelly. He's my next angel. And Irish Mexican dude, man, bigger than me. Anyway, my grandma was there for me through all that crap with my mom. My grandma was there for me. I am so grateful, for the love that I got from my grandma. And there was, no matter where I was, I mean, I wasn't anywhere close to her, living in the same state or whatever. I always knew there was a woman I could trust because of my grandmother. And that was, I'll be eternally grateful for that. Thank you, Grandma Greegree. I miss you. She died July 10th, 1984. No, 1985. And I had gotten sober July 8th of 1984, and so I was sober a year. And that was actually when Live Aid was going on with all those bands, and going up there and to her funeral. She had a heart attack. She had the same, myocardial infarction that I had, a heart attack. And back in 1985, they didn't have the technology and the tools and the knowledge and experience that they have now. And she died it's a blocked artery is what that is. That's leading into your heart. So your heart's not getting, the blood it needs to. So, that's how she died. And I remember talking to my grandpa, when we were up there, coming from California. And I go, I think I called up and said that I'd been sober a year. And I said, did Grandma know that? And my grandpa said, yeah. And I was like, I was really happy about that my grandma knew I'd been sober a year. I miss you, Grandma. She was 62 years old. It's too young to go.